Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. Thanks for attending our exclusive session for the launch of the new book, Unlearn, for Latin America region. This session will be hosted by Barry O Reilly, who is a business consultant, entrepreneur, and author of 2 international bestsellers, Unlearn and Lean Enterprise. Barry O Reilly has pioneered the intersection of business model innovation, product development, organizational design, and culture transformation. Please join me in welcoming our speaker.
Okay, welcome everybody, and thanks very much for joining me. It's an absolute privilege to launch this book, especially in a new language. So thank you very much everybody for joining me to hear the stories that hopefully will inspire you about how you can let go of past success to achieve extraordinary results in the future. But before we dive into the book, I actually want to step back a little bit into the past. And talk a little bit about some of the challenges we're currently facing. Now, the 1918 influenza pandemic, known as the Spanish flu, was the most severe pandemic in recent history. It is estimated that 500 million people, or a third of the world's population, became infected with the virus, and over 50 million people died worldwide. And what was unique about this pandemic was actually it affected people between the ages of 20 and 40 a lot. And there was no vaccine, there was no antibiotics. We had to manage it through social distancing in many ways. But it's always interesting to understand, does anyone know why it was called the Spanish flu? Always sort of keen to ask people that question when it comes up. Well, the interesting thing is we were still very much in the midst of World War I, and a lot of the countries such as Germany, France, and the United Kingdom, the United States, were actually suppressing information. They weren't sharing what was happening in their countries. And because Spain was a neutral country, the press were able to report that King Alfonso VIII actually contracted the illness. So it was really just the Spanish were the first people to report this in an open, transparent manner. And that's why it became known as the Spanish flu. So as a result of the pandemic, I think it's fair to say we're all sort of experiencing disruption in ways that we maybe never even anticipated. And disruption isn't something new for us. If we look at 20 years ago, like the biggest companies in the world were all about being number one in your market, grow as big as you can, build moats and barriers to entry around your business. And even 10 years ago, the company still pretty much stayed the same. Until today, where it's a radically different companies. Apple has become the first $2 trillion company. Jeff Bezos, the most wealthiest publicly known individual that we've ever known. Because these businesses have scaled rapidly, not through people, but through technology. They've built systems that have allowed them to rapidly learn and at high accuracy and details about customer behavior, emerging behaviors about what are happening, and allowed them to rapidly respond to those changing circumstances. So why the price of oil drops in some instances below $0, and companies like Amazon are hitting record highs because of their ability to respond to changing circumstances. You know, and this is sort of a classic problem. For many leaders, they believe the things that made them successful yesterday will be the things that make them successful in the future. We have a very linear mindset when it comes to the way we think change happens, because innovation is much more on an exponential curve. And we see this all the time. You see, COVID is not a disruption. It's actually an accelerant. And in the last sort of 10 weeks, we've accelerated 10 years in digital and remote working. But what is being disrupted is actually your behavior, your comfortable ways of leading and managing and communicating with individuals that were based in a paradigm that currently no longer exists. Our ability to be in person, to work with one another. So what I often say to people is that disruption doesn't actually apply to organizations. The truth is it applies to individuals. And it's our behavior and our thinking that actually gets disrupted. And so just like a product has features, and you've got to constantly innovate the features of your product for it to stay relevant in its market, humans have behavior. Therefore, we must constantly innovate our behavior to stay relevant in the markets we exist. Yes, we risk being disrupted. So when you think about the great leaders that you've worked with, they've cultivated this capability within themselves to innovate, to adapt, to anticipate the future. And they invest in experiences that enable them to grow. They seek situations that are uncomfortable and uncertain and the results unknown. And these are very much the foundational principles of both the cycle of unlearning that I'll show you soon. So when I started to look into this area of unlearning, it was very interesting to me. The first sort of mention of unlearning was actually from Bo Henberg in 1981. And he talked about, as our knowledge grows, simultaneously, other knowledge becomes obsolete as our reality changes. So understanding actually involves both learning new knowledge and discarding misleading knowledge that is no longer relevant. And this is really what inspired me about thinking about unlearning, and how I found when I wrote my first book, Lean Enterprise, and had the chance to travel all over the world and work with some of the best leaders in the world, from companies like Capital One, NASA, British Airways, huge organizations all over the world. And what I constantly found was that while learning new skills was hard, what was even tougher was getting leaders to let go of their existing behavior, especially if it had made them successful in the past. So when I talk to people about unlearning, some people actually get quite upset. They say, well, what are you saying? Everything I know is wrong, and nothing could be further from the truth. Now, the way I describe unlearning is as a system. So unlearning is a process of letting go, reframing, or moving away from once useful mindsets and acquired behaviors that were effective in the past, but now limit our success. So it's not forgetting, discarding, removing your knowledge or experience. It's the conscious act of letting go of outdated information and actively engaging and taking in new information to inform your decision-making and action. So hopefully this starts to give you a sense of what I'm meaning by unlearning. And maybe you're sitting there thinking, okay, Barry, I think I agree. Unlearning is a skill that I need to learn. So how do I know what I need to unlearn? And as part of the system, I can help you diagnose areas that you need to unlearn. And I ask people these 4 questions. So if you're sitting at home or wherever you might be, take out a piece of paper, and I want you to try and write down a couple of the answers that come into your mind when I ask you these questions. So the first question I would ask you to help you diagnose where you might need to unlearn is, can you think of a situation where you're not living up to the outcomes that you desire? Maybe you're not meeting the expectations that you have for yourself or your teams. Maybe there's a situation that you're struggling to resolve, or you're avoiding altogether because you just can't deal with it right now. Or maybe you've tried everything that you can think of and you're still not getting the desired results or a breakthrough. I'll give you a minute to think about these questions. Not living up to the outcomes you're aiming for, and not living or achieving the expectations you have for yourself, situations that you're struggling with or maybe even avoiding, or somewhere you've tried everything you can think of and you're still not getting the breakthrough that you're looking for. I'll give you 30 seconds to try and write that down. If you want, you can sort of share some of yours in the channel if you like. And what I often find is when I ask people these questions, it's not really one challenge that comes up. Actually, they write down 5 or 6 challenges, right? So these are all signals. And the reason we have challenges is that our existing behavior is not working. If our behavior worked, we wouldn't face these challenges. So it's a signal that our existing behavior is not working and we need to unlearn. So what I also started to realize is that once I could help people diagnose what their issues were or the obstacles that they were facing, really, once they understood the obstacles, it was really about thinking about the real outcome that they're aiming for, how they want to get better. And once I was able to help people define that in an unlearning statement, really then it was about relearning and taking the uncomfortable sort of steps to try new behaviors and practice them to get better in search of the breakthroughs that you're trying to get away from your old habits, ways of working. And this wasn't really a one and done process. The more people started to recognize areas that they needed to improve or unlearn and practice relearning and trying to get breakthroughs, it became a virtuous cycle. And I've coached this system to executives from Fortune 500 companies to scaling startups here in San Francisco, where I live, to help all of these companies have phenomenal results and breakthroughs. Now, the question is now you've diagnosed where you want to unlearn, it's also a question of how to start. And often for very senior leaders, what I find is people write down very big challenges, like we need to change the culture of our company, or we need to change our mindset in our business. And they're really big challenges. And it's important to think big about the challenges you want to tackle. But the important part is not to think big and start big. You actually need to think big, but start small. Start with yourself. What's your part to play in solving that challenge? So when I'm talking with leaders, I often say the best place to actually start is with yourself, is to role model the behaviors and sharing with your team what you're trying to unlearn. And by doing that, you're role modeling this change. It really inspires your team, and they start to see how you can unlearn challenges together, right through to start tackling them at an organizational level. You know, one of my sort of fun examples of this is working with the CIO of Volkswagen. You know, and everyone would joke that it's very easy to be an executive. You just walk around and, you know, sit in meetings all day. You don't really have to do any work. So what he decided to do was hold a competition where somebody could be the CIO for a day. And all the people in the company could volunteer to try and do that role. And the winner was a software engineer that had been with the company for 2 years. So he got to be the CIO for an entire day. And the real CIO just followed him around in meetings. And 2 hours into the day, they had a massive outage where their entire website went down. But the real CIO still made the 2-year engineer stay as the CIO throughout that entire process, where he would sit there and see how they had to deal with that scenario from the back of the room, see how his team responded to the challenge when he wasn't there making the final decisions. It was actually a 2-year engineer. So you can see the power that sort of creates for teams when they see a leader like really living and breathing these ways of how they can get fresh perspectives about how the company operates to build a stronger and more resilient company. Now, one of the things from working with lots of these leaders, I've identified a set of characteristics that are also really important about understanding how, if you're going to unlearn, how you can be really good at it. So the first characteristic is curiosity. And it's a funny one. Whenever I ask anyone, are they curious? I've never had anyone say no. And yet, you know, when I often ask leaders, well, say you give someone more junior than you a task to solve that you know how to solve, and they tackle it in a different way from you. What's your natural reaction? Now, most people sort of smile and will say, oh, they're obviously doing it the wrong way. You know, and that's such a great example of how we shut ourselves down from learning, is by not exploring or being curious about different ways to do things. Another great example of this was the COO of Global Markets for HSBC. And this is one of the most senior people in HSBC. And what he would do is sit down with the graduates that came in from college every year, and he would give them problems to work on that he was working on, specifically to see how they would solve those challenges. And as a result, he got to learn all these new technologies, these new methods, these new mindset of the young people in the company and how they want to tackle very tough challenges. But you can imagine for a leader of a company like that, the cultural artifact it creates when you have one of the most senior people in the company sitting with the most junior to solve problems together. And the other aspects that are really important is ownership. And this is when you're not getting the results you want. What do? Do you blame the team, another person, the situation, or do you own the results and figure out what you need to change to have an impact? And if you're not losing the 5 kilograms, do you blame the chocolate bar, or do you focus on yourself? You know, these are some of the questions we got to ask ourselves. And the next is about commitment, because you're going to have to do things that you initially struggle with. And that means you have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. And what's really important about this is often our existing behavior is limiting our success. Therefore, we're going to have to adopt new behaviors to try and be successful. And new behaviors are uncomfortable. And people fear trying things that they're not good at. And this is why creating safety to succeed is so important. And we do this by thinking big, but starting small. And small creates safety at many different levels. You have mental safety, so people feel psychologically safe to admit small mistakes that they have made or things that they have tried. And physical safety is about taking small steps or safe to fail experiments that you can recover if it turns out as you don't expect. And economic safety is small risks, like smaller investments to find out if you're moving in the direction you want. So the mantra you will always hear me say about Unlearning is it's important to think big about what you want to try and tackle, what you want to change, what you want to unlearn to break free of your linear mindset. But the important part is to start small, with small steps to explore new behaviors safely, so you can learn fast which behaviors are moving you towards your desired outcomes or not. And these are sort of very much the constituents of Unlearning. So what I thought I would share with the audience here today is just a couple of examples of companies that I've been working with who have applied this system to really unlock some amazing results. And we've seen so many great examples of this at the moment, and how actually counterintuitive approaches to many classic problems have been the ability for these organizations to succeed. And so I'm going to start, first of all, with unlearning how to succeed in uncertainty. You see, one of the challenges, especially even as COVID has hit as a great example of this, is that when you're working in highly uncertain domains, you have to recognize that there's going to be many unknowns, and that you might be attempting tasks that you've never done before, like working fully distributedly, for an example. And setting expectations with your team that you're embarking on a joint problem-solving mission where everyone is learning and creating knowledge as you go is really important attribute. And yet so many people, when they're faced with uncertainty, the natural reaction is to stop, to pause, to wait and see what happens. But unfortunately, the way to actually succeed is to act, is to learn your way through the uncertainty. So counterintuitively, the organizations that are accelerating in COVID are the ones that are taking action, small steps, and learning their way through the problems. The companies that are failing are the ones that are freezing, stopping, cutting budgets, stopping because they're not making any momentum, they're not learning. You know, and there couldn't be a better example of this than the platform we're on right now with Zoom. You know, one of the most, Zoom went from 10 million monthly users to 200 million users within 3 months. And they had issues. Their platform was struggling. They had security breaches. But one of the things Eric Young did was he got out right in front and recognized and called out that they were having problems, that they needed to make changes, and telling the community that they were falling short of the expectations that they had for themselves, as they had a 20 times the amount of people on their platform. You know, and the way that they called it out that there were problems, like Facebook were hacking their information and selling it to different clients. Everything from people Zoom bombing or children's classrooms where people could just drop in, anyone. But what they did was that they rapidly responded. They owned the issues and then kept responding with constant small changes. In fact, many of you are probably using Zoom every week, and there's a new feature every time you log on to the application, because that's how fast they're trying to respond to the issues that have been identified. You know, but what they're doing is they're learning their way through the uncertainty, and their customers recognize that. If anything, most people are very grateful for Zoom because it's kept us all connected. We almost spend too much time on it. But I think it's recognizing that their leaders owned the problem when they had them, and then rapidly responded to the issues and learned their way through the uncertainty. So as you're facing uncertainty in your business at the moment, what behaviors are you doing? Are you cutting budgets? Are you stopping what you're doing, cutting back on initiatives? Or are you thinking about what small steps you can take to keep learning your way through that uncertainty to be successful? And the companies that will be successful are acting their way there. And this is all about coming down to empowering action. And if ever empowering your teams was more important, working in a distributed manner is a great example of this. You know, for many leaders, they're used to sitting in their offices and watching what teams are doing or telling them what to do. But in a distributed world, you're not sitting there with your employees every day. You have to believe that they're executing work and that they understand what work needs to be executed. And you can't be there. So how do you make sure you're empowering your teams to be successful? This is John LaGurge. He was the CEO of T-Mobile, and the US's large mobile phone carrier in the US. He took on the role in September 2012. And he actually wasn't in the telco business at all. And what he started off by doing is when he took off the new role as CEO, he did something actually very different. And he didn't sit in meetings and presentations and PowerPoint discussions. He actually did none of that. But what he did do is he got a phone line installed in his office directly to the customer complaints line. And for the first month, he would listen to customer complaint calls for 4 hours a day to really understand what problems they were facing. And after a few months of doing this, he launched a program called On Carrier. And this was in March 2013, where they introduced the concept of streamlining plan structure for new customers. So they got rid of contracts, they subsidized phones, the coverage fees for data and early termination were canceled. You just paid $50 a month for 500 megabytes of data, and you could cancel at any time. And they absolutely disrupted the market. And customers had such a problem about understanding how much their bills were going to be, how data worked with their plan. It was a mess. So he just simplified it from listening to those customer complaint calls. And they absolutely destroyed and pushed ahead of everyone in the market. But they didn't just stop there. And they started doing more changes. So they got rid of contracts altogether on phones. Anyone could cancel at any time they wanted. International roaming rates were standardized. You didn't pay more when you went international. And they let you try the iPhone for free and see if you like it, or you could send it back. And all these were sort of the different ways that they have really challenged the way telecommunications operates. And now they were the fourth in the market when he started. And last year they bought the third competitor, Sprint, and now have become the third largest telco in the US, challenging Verizon and AT&T, which is a massive move, considering in telecommunications, it's a fixed market. The only way you grow your business is taking customers away from your competitors, and they're doing it. But what was interesting about John is he didn't just stop there. He just didn't say, well, I'm the CEO and I'm telling everybody what to do. He started to push that autonomy down into his teams. So whenever you call anyone at TT&T, you go straight to one of these teams of experts. And these are small cross-functional teams that are responsible for customer service. And every day they are very clear on what outcomes they're trying to achieve, both from a productivity perspective and a profitability perspective. So they know the number of calls they handle each day, how long the calls take, how many active issues and cases are open. but they also have financial profitability and customer satisfaction outcomes that they're responsible for. So when you go through straight to this team, they can do anything that they want. They don't have to ask their manager for sign off to replace a phone or credit a customer $200. If they think it's the right thing to do, they're just allowed to do it because they're experts, because they're pushing accountability and autonomy right to the edge of their organization. That means they're able to make decisions faster, have happier customers, and they actually have the highest customer satisfaction rating of any company in North America. You know, when I launched the book originally, it feels like a while ago now, but at the end of 2018, I was at Las Vegas for Amazon's Global Summit, actually their last Global Summit. And one of the things that Werner Vogels, the CTO of the company, said is 95% of their new features come directly from what their customers ask them to build. So when people talk about what changes you need to make sure that you create great products, it's to listen to your customers and rapidly respond to their challenges and use that to describe your measures of success. All right, so the last sort of example I wanted to sort of share was really about often how we measure success on initiatives. And for too many companies, they're very focused on output. They're not focused on outcomes. You see, output is easy. It's measuring, are we on time? Have we achieved the scope or the budget that we said we would do? But outcomes are harder. Like, have we reduced customer retention by 50%? Or have we increased profitability of our business by 35% in the next 2 months? They are outcomes. But most people just measure output for projects. Did you deliver all the features on time, on the date? You can achieve all your output and have no influence on outcomes. And this is one of the challenges. You know, and even today, when we think about how we do these massive organizational transformations, it's all about copying maturity models or trying to implement huge agile scaling frameworks like SAFe, where they're really just tick box transformations. There's lots of activity, lots of people being trained, lots of people working on things, but there's no outcomes are communicated to what success is. If I were to ask you, how do you know your business has digitally transformed? What would be your answer? Are you able to crisply articulate what outcomes will be achieved? You see, if you want to be successful in doing highly uncertain, complex innovation, you have to get clear on the outcomes you're aiming for and communicating them to your teams to allow them to understand what output they should be creating, the activities they should do to be successful. So one of my favorite examples of this is Capital One, who I've had the pleasure to work with their executive team. And Rich Fairbank, who's the founder and CEO of Capital One, called out that increasingly they're focusing on cloud computing to build underlying capabilities to allow them to build products faster and more effective over time. So when we started to ask him, well, what were your outcomes you want to see about digitally transforming your business? He actually started to quantify them. He would say, well, I want to increase the percentage of customer investment with the bank. Actually said, increase the customer spend with us by 30% over the next 12 months. He wanted to see a 50% increase in the rate of new products brought to market or product innovation, or an uplift in actually employee satisfaction, where 25% of people would say that this is the best place that they've ever worked and where they are able to do the best work of their lives. So this were the sort of key outcomes he would describe to demonstrate the company had actually digitally transformed. And when you start to do this, then it's much more easier for teams to start to think about, well, if we need to increase the percentage of customer investment with the bank by 30%, what kind of new products could I bring to market to do that? How could I change the way the mobile app works, where I could get people to buy new services or save more money with us instead of spending it on other credit cards? It actually creates a lot of context to let your teams take action. And so one of the things we found, especially when we started to look about changing the way that their technology infrastructure operated, is that once we described outcomes that we were aiming for about reducing their operating costs of their IT, and that they could faster and frequently make more software deployments, it actually became a really powerful way to measure success. So while most companies are doing digital transformation and talking about training programs that they're running and how many teams that they have are working in an agile way, we were measuring actual costs of operating infrastructure and how frequently new software was being released. Changes in behavior, with teams having aspirations about where they're trying to get to. And then all the teams could start to map where they were relative to the success that they wanted to try and achieve. So how cost efficient were they? How optimized was their architecture that they could make sort of fast changes? Now, often when you make this information transparent to people, it's very uncomfortable. The orange circle team, everybody looks at them and go, oh, you're down in the bottom right, you must be terrible. But for them, that was actually really successful. And they were an old sort of IT legacy infrastructure team that were actually way further down, but they got to a place almost in the middle, which was excellent based on the expectations people had. They were actually doing better than a lot of the teams that are in the top right quadrant because they were already smaller teams. And even the way we react to information is, if you're measuring people on a bell curve about how you're going to give them bonuses only if they perform well, it actually drives the wrong type of behaviors. You see, pay for performance is one of the biggest problems, and how people get their bonuses if they complete their work on time, on budget, on scope, actually is counterintuitive to helping people innovate. They tend to lowball or underestimate what they think is possible because they want to make sure they hit their target to be successful. Where high performance teams get good at describing outcomes, like trying to increase 30% more of customer investment with the bank. And maybe they only get to 24%. But wow, that's brilliant compared to going from 0 to 24, rather than not getting your bonus if you don't hit 30. This is why these high performance organizations power ahead. And they create safety at so many different levels. And these are the questions we ask ourselves when we're doing this work is, what if there were no incentives, or not even, or only small financial incentives for teams to change? Actually, small incentives can have massive impact when people feel like they're contributing to something meaningful. You see, the teams at Capital One could frequently deploy their software to customers and see how much happier their customers were with their products, how quick more they were using it. And that's what inspires teams, is building great products that people love and use. And that's much more motivating than paying someone a bonus at the end of the year because they released a feature on time. The thing is, measuring output is easy, measuring outcomes is hard. But when you measure hard to measure outcomes, it actually always leads to better results. So the question hopefully most of you have now is, well, how can I think big and start small to unlearn today? And what I would like you to think about is go back and look at the challenge that you wrote down at the start of this talk. What was the area that you felt you needed to unlearn? And then I want you to sort of go and find somebody that you trust. Maybe it's a friend, somebody you know. And I want you to ask them on a scale of 1 to 10, how well are you doing trying to unlearn that challenge? And maybe they're a good friend and they'll tell you honestly that you're a 4 out of 10. And I want you to thank them for being honest with you and saying, thanks for telling me I'm a 4. And then I want you to ask them how you can get half a point better. How can you get to 4.5 in the next week? Maybe they'll suggest some new behaviors that you could try. And I'd like you to pick the behavior that's slightly uncomfortable. It's just a little bit outside your comfort zone, and try that for a week. And then go back to the person and say, hey, I'm trying to unlearn decision making. And one of your suggestions was what I should say when someone asks me a question, I should ask them what they think first. I've done that for the week. Did you notice? What do you think? Maybe they'll tell you you're now a 6. Ask them how you can get half a point better again. And I guarantee if you get into that habit and keep practicing, it'll be amazing to see some of the results that you achieve. You know, writing this book has been a real inspiration. Recently, somebody sent me a photo of Serena Williams, the sort of world famous athlete and real leader, reading the book before she took part in the Australian Open. You know, it's super inspiring for me to see how this book is helping people unlearn and adapt their behavior for success. I've got a podcast where I've had the chief product officer for Netflix, product leaders like you'll see here from Agile World and heads of Finnair. You know, Eric Ries is a huge fan of the book and really recommends anybody who's looking to try and apply experimentation to try it out. There's lots of different ways that you can connect with me to learn more about what I'm doing. I've even been doing Unlearn classes in virtual reality, which has been super fun to teach classrooms of hundreds of people all over the world in a virtual environment. You know, the rolling wave or the pandemic that we're currently facing it's not a one and done event. We're constantly going to have to face these challenges. So if we can't find ways to think bigger and really build the skills to collaborate at a global level and adapt to these changes, we're really going to struggle. You know, this pandemic is just one of the problems that we've got to face. But I believe if we sort of think big, start small and learn fast, we can actually tackle some of the bigger societal issues that we have to face, from removing poverty to ending hunger and creating education and opportunity for all. And it's been a real pleasure to sort of share the book with you. I'm delighted that there's interest to have this translated to Spanish, and hopefully even more people across the globe have the opportunity to access it, read it in their native language and enjoy it. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to taking as many of your questions as I can. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Barry. I can say that many of us accomplished the goal of learning something new this afternoon. We really appreciate that you taught us what you taught us today, among many things, to create awareness about how important it is to unlearn in order to start learning again. I will, for my part, I will definitely put your advice into practice and review all the references you shared with us. I would love to go on and go on. However, we have some questions from our audience. If you can you answer 3 questions?
Please, yeah, happy to answer them. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This first question is from an anonymous. What do you recommend to do when we don't meet the planned objectives and get frustrated? Should we start from scratch?
Yeah, this is the most interesting part about behavior change. The thing to focus on, especially when you're starting to unlearn, is not so much the results, it's to celebrate that you're attempting. And this is sort of where people often get stuck. You know, they might say they want to unlearn and they get very excited and they say, well, the way I will have unlearned stress is that, you know, I go home every day next week feeling not stressed at all. And then they come in on Monday and they have a bad day and they get stressed and they're like, oh, this is never going to work. Because they're focused on the result. And really, the problem is sometimes you're going to have positive results. Most of the time, as you start to unlearn, you're going to have negative results. It's not going to work out. So the thing to focus on is actually the attempt. That you start small and celebrate that you're attempting these activities. And maybe the way you're going to try and unlearn stress is not open your email on Sunday night. Or maybe the way you're going to try and unlearn stress is keep the first hour of your day free so you can spend time with your team and talk to them what the problems are. If you just keep attempting new things to unlearn stress, you're going to find the breakthroughs. But if you just focus on the results of the one thing that you try and they turn out to be negative, that's what normally makes people stop attempting. So that's what I would say, people focus on, celebrate that you're trying, not celebrate the results. If you keep trying, you're going to get positive results eventually. So that would be my answer to that question.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Barry. We have another question from Mr. Fortunato. Can we say that risking a business budget, we can't risk our business budget for staff to use their own creativity?
Yeah, so I think this is why thinking big but starting small is so important, right? Like nobody wants to risk their entire business on one attempt or one try. If you've got to that situation, you're already in trouble. You know, like the way you keep your business alive and your teams engaged and people excited is that they're constantly trying new things, as small things, little things each day to try and get better. So what I would encourage, like you as a leader, or the question came from Raphael, I believe, is just keep encouraging your teams to try and get a little bit better every day. Try one new technique every day. And some of them will work and some of them won't work. But as these build up over time, you'll have tried so many things that your business won't need like one thing to try and save it, because you'll have tried hundreds of things to move it a little bit forward every day. And I think that's the area to focus on.
Okay, thank you very much, Barry. We have more questions. I'm wondering if can you answer all of them?
Yeah, I'll answer as many as I can. Yeah,
I can see that. We have one here in English language. Let me.
Okay, it's in English. I can.
What do you do if your team is not what you need to implement this way to do? I think it's not well.
Yeah, if someone wants to tell them to ask it in español is fine, and we can translate it.
Okay, we have another here. With what word would you summarize your book, but not Unlearn?
How to adapt to continuously changing circumstances.
Okay. Okay, great.
So adaptability is probably really.
Adaptability.
Yeah.
Okay. Some of the people is also asking us if the book is only in English language. No, this book is also in Spanish language. You can buy it through our e-commerce. I don't know if we have more questions. I think we don't have any more here in the Q&A panel. We all appreciate all your time today, Barry. We're going to share for all of you all this presentation, and we will share it through our social media too. Thank you very much, Barry.
Yeah, what I'd encourage everybody, I'm going to take a little photo and I'm going to share it all on my my social media field, so I'll just get you to wave as well. Yeah, and please do reach out. If you read the book, I'm on Barry O Reilly at Instagram and Facebook and Twitter, or however you like, and LinkedIn. So yeah, please reach out, say hello, let me know what you think of the book. And don't forget to write a review of the book when you do read it. I think many people forget how much of a huge impact that small little thing does. So thank you very much. Yeah, gracias, amigos, for having me. It's been great.
Thank you, Barry. Have a great one.
Thank you.